Hello everyone, Dane here from Moving to Canada. We are just starting our live video info session that we have been advertising for the last couple of days. Today we are going to be talking about Canada's express entry immigration system. So for those of you who are out there who are looking for information about express entry, you want to know if you're eligible, you want to know how to apply, definitely you are in the right place. We are going to be covering all of that today. Because this is a live video, we're just going to give a couple minutes for the rest of our audience to join, make sure that everybody who is interested is able to come into the live video and view what they need to view. So I'm also going to be logging into the live video on my laptop, so just be aware that while you are watching the video, you can feel free to comment, and we're going to have a question period where we go through any questions that you might have. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but sometimes it's not always possible to cover all of them, but please feel free to comment your questions. And as a part of today's video, for the very first time, we are joined by one of the amazing Canadian immigration consultants who we work with here at Moving to Canada, who we recommend people to work with. This is Louise Willis from Canadian Visa Specialists.
Yes, hi Dane, thanks so much for having me on your presentation. So do you want me just to give a little bit of background about who I am? So hi everybody, my name is Louise. I've been working in Canadian immigration since about 2002. I started work in England and then came over to Canada and have been working in immigration ever since then. So I started off doing a lot of relocation, and then I got my license. I've had my license for about 10 years now, 11 years actually, but I've been in immigration since for about 17 years now. So what we do here is that we're based sitting here in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in Montreal, Quebec right now, where it is glorious -7 or so outside.
It sounds like it's cold, but it's not as cold as it sounds. You
Yeah.
just have to wear the right clothes, and it's
Exactly.
okay, right?
Exactly. So I guess to give you a bit of background, just so you know, I am what's called a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. This is important for people to know because if anybody is looking to ever hire someone,
Mhm.
I guess to take care of their application, they do need to make sure that they're authorized representatives.
Right.
Okay, so they can hire a lawyer or they can hire a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. What it means is that I do have my license to legally represent somebody to the government of Canada.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's always important for people to know.
Yeah, and what it means for you guys watching is that Louise has a ton of experience in a bunch of different areas of Canadian immigration and is a specialist when it comes to express entry. So we are here, we're going to bring you a lot of information about express entry. We're going to talk all about the eligibility for it, about how to apply. We are just going to give it a couple of minutes here just for a couple more people to join. And I am following along with the video on my laptop. I'm not just casually doing work while supposed to be teaching you about express entry, but I will be following along, and we'll be taking questions that you have at the end of the video. So if you do have anything that we're not covering here, if you have any specific questions, please feel free to write those in. We're just going to take a couple more minutes and wait for the rest of the people to join. So, Louise, we were just talking, you yourself have actually immigrated to Canada.
So my family immigrated to Canada, so they have my parents have a bit of an interesting story. They're both from England,
Mm-hmm.
and they left England and they moved to Northern Ireland.
Great.
And then from Northern Ireland, they moved to Mandeville, Jamaica, and then they left Jamaica to go to the Saguenay in Quebec.
The Saguenay, everybody's
So,
favorite
yeah.
place in Canada. One of those. I'm joking. I mean, I'm not to diss the Saguenay, but
It was beautiful. It was very cold. It was colder than I think we expected, because I think until you come, and especially for those of you who don't know, it's more northern Quebec. It's gorgeous. But then they stayed there a while, and then they moved over to Montreal.
okay. Great. And you, as an immigration consultant working in immigration for 17 years, you've traveled around Canada a lot,
Sure.
I'm
Yeah, I've
guessing?
been. You know what? The only place I haven't been to and I really want to go is Newfoundland. I haven't been there yet.
Newfoundland is
yeah.
gorgeous. I went there once when I was about 11 with my
Okay.
family on a family vacation. We climbed, there's a mountain there called Gros Morne. It's
Okay.
beautiful,
Nice.
very beautiful mountain. I climbed that in sandals because my parents were not being responsible parents, and the next day my ankles swelled up.
Oh
so
no.
it's,
Well, one day I hope to get there. So
Um,
even just to drink some screech.
Yeah, Newfoundland Screech, a tradition.
But yes, I have been to every province. Only to Yukon, I haven't been to Nunavut. And I've met with a lot of people, obviously, who have immigrated. I've met with a lot of employers, because we do also do like work permits and all of that. So it's important, to visit everywhere, because you have to know your country in order to be able, obviously, to talk about it. Because everything does vary in Canada. Although we're one country, numerous things are governed provincially, so things such as like education, healthcare, driving, that's all governed provincially. So it's important for people to know that there are differences going from province to province.
Yeah.
With licensing for qualifications, especially in the trades, that's important for people to know.
And maybe this is a dangerous question to ask you, but if you had to choose one location in Canada that is your favorite location, where is it?
Well, clearly I'm going to say Montreal because, I do love Montreal. It's what I consider my home. Mm-hmm. If I had the chance to move elsewhere, it's hard because honestly, there's so many places that I visited that I love. I love Nova Scotia, where you're from. Even, I shouldn't say this is Montreal, but Toronto. I know Vancouver, Victoria. I love Vancouver Island. So. Yeah,
I've been to Vancouver Island once as well.
Gorgeous.
It's there's BC itself is just such a beautiful province.
Yeah.
Like stunning. So I think we've got quite a bit of people here. So I think we're ready to jump into this.
Okay.
So thank you guys for your patience while we waited for our audience to join. Just to reintroduce for those of you who have joined recently, I'm Dane Stewart from Moving to Canada. I'm joined today for the first time on one of our live videos by Louise Willis, a Canadian immigration consultant. And today we are going to be covering Express Entry. So just to give you a rundown of what we're going to be going over today, we're going to start with just a little bit of an overview of Express Entry. We're going to move on and talk about eligibility for Express Entry. And there are different programs that are aligned with Express Entry. We're going to talk about each of those programs and talk about, are you eligible? Then we're going to talk about how to apply. Being eligible is one thing. Actually getting that application in is another one.
Exactly.
And an important component of that, another thing we're going to talk about is the Comprehensive Ranking System, or the CRS score, which those of you who have any familiarity with Express Entry have probably heard of the CRS score. It's a really important concept to understand if you do want to succeed through Express Entry. And then following that, we are going to open it up to questions. So as I said before, please, while you're watching, if you have any questions, anything we aren't answering, please feel free to write them in. We are following along to the video here on my laptop, and we will be taking your questions at the end of the period.
Well, also, just so that you know, for any of you who have already got a profile, we're going to be also including some tips, about what to do when you are submitting your actual permanent residency application. So just some good practical tips for you.
Yes, because it's a complicated application, the one for Canadian permanent residence.
It is, yeah.
And even just a single tiny mistake can be cause for your file to be refused or rejected. So let's jump right into it.
Sure.
And I'm going to give this first question to you,
Okay.
Louise. What is Express Entry?
So what is Express Entry? And it is a good question because it's a file management system. Okay, so Express Entry was brought out January 1st, 2015 is actually when it came into existence. And what it does, it's a way for Immigration Canada to be able to manage all of their applications that come through in one of the economic categories. Okay, so nobody actually technically applies for Express Entry. They're applying via Express Entry.
Express Entry itself is not an immigration program.
Exactly. So the programs that it applies to it's the three main economic categories. So it's federal skilled worker, federal skilled trade, and Canadian experience class.
And all three of those immigration programs, they're all for skilled workers.
Yeah.
And all of the Express Entry aligned programs are for skilled workers.
Exactly.
Skilled work refers to a system in Canada known as the National Occupational Classification System, or the NOC, and you may have heard of NOC codes before. Under the NOC system, there are 5 different skill levels of positions. There's skill level 0, which is the highest, A, B, C, and D. Skilled work is considered those top 3 NOCs. So NOC skill level 0, A, or B are the NOC codes that are eligible for the Express Entry programs.
Exactly. So that's one of the first things that a potential applicant needs to do is they need to determine what is their NOC code or what is their NOC code. Because that basically determines eligibility, and you have to make sure when you create your application that everything is consistent and is aligned with what is listed in the NOC code.
Mm-hmm. And to find out more information about your NOC code, we've actually got a resource on our website, movingtocanada.com. That's the number 2, movingtocanada.com. You could also book an appointment with an immigration consultant. You can also check out the government website, the NOC database, where they have all of the codes listed. So you can also just search it through there.
There's one thing I just want to mention, if that's okay, with regard to the NOC code, is that it's important that you understand a little bit how it works. Okay, so you'll see that the NOC is broken down. Mainly, you have to look at the two main components. The first one is what's called the lead statement. You have to make sure that you do what is listed in the lead statement, and then you have a list of the main duties, and you have to make sure that you do what immigration says significant amount of the main duties listed. Okay, so basically that means at least 50%. Okay, just over 50% is of the duties you need to show what you need to show that you've done.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that's important to know about Express Entry is that it's not enough simply to meet the minimum eligibility criteria, because Express Entry is a competitive points-based system. So for those of you who want to immigrate, first you have to meet the minimum eligibility criteria. That kind of is the key that opens the door, and that allows you to enter the Express Entry pool. Once you're in that pool, the Canadian government goes into the pool and only selects what they consider to be the most competitive candidates in the pool. Now, how do they determine which candidates are the most competitive? That's using the comprehensive ranking system, a points-based system. So everyone who enters the pool is assigned a score. Only the people with the highest scores are invited to apply. And we will cover that in more detail in a little bit. So, Louise, why would someone choose Express Entry over another type of Canadian immigration pathway?
Well, I mean, the greatest thing about Express Entry, it's literally there in the name, it's fast, okay? So it's, immigration will process 80% of the applications in 6 months or less, okay? And for anybody who's looked at Canadian immigration in the past, this is a huge improvement. Okay, applications used to take, between 4 to 7 years to process. So for immigration to change the system and bring this in to be processed so fast is a huge benefit. Obviously there are things, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but you have to get into the pool first before you can actually get an invitation to apply and submit the application. So that 6 months is the actual processing time, okay, once the application has been filed.
Mm-hmm. And another big reason that people choose Express Entry is because it's family friendly. The way Express Entry works is you apply as a principal applicant, but within your application you can include a partner, so that can be a spouse, a common law partner, a conjugal partner, and you can also bring any dependent children who you have. So you apply as a family. If you, as the principal applicant, are qualified, are competitive enough, you get your invitation, you apply, all of you will receive your permanent resident status. So that's really lucrative for people who are hoping to uproot their families to come to Canada.
Yeah, and just to jump in, Canada does recognize dependent children up until the age of 22. Okay, so your children that are 21 years old and 364 days are included in your application. Okay, once they turn 22, they are not, but they are included up till the age of 21. And also Immigration Canada, with regards to your spouse, so you don't have to be married, Canada does recognize common law, and so what that means is that you do need to demonstrate that you have lived with your partner for at least the last 12 months, okay, in order to be eligible as a common law spouse.
Mm-hmm. And the end result of Express Entry is a status called permanent resident status. You might be familiar with this, sometimes called PR. Permanent resident status grants you, the holder, the right to legally live and work anywhere in Canada. You can change employers, you can move from province to province. So it's a really great type of status to have. And once you have your PR status for 3 out of 5.
2 out of 5.
2 out of 5.
Oh wait, sorry. You have to be. You were right in what you were saying. To maintain permanent residency status, you have to be in Canada for 2 years out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but once you've been here for 3 years as a PR, then you can apply for citizenship.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So let's talk about the Express Entry aligned programs.
Okay.
So as we mentioned, Express Entry itself is an immigration system. It's not a program. There are 3 immigration programs that are aligned with Express Entry. Maybe I'll take the first one.
Sure.
I'll throw it to you for the other ones. So the first one, which is usually the most common one for people applying from outside of Canada, is called the Federal Skilled Worker Program, or FSW. In order to be eligible for this immigration program, you do have to have at least 1 year of continuous full-time skilled work experience. You have to have a minimum level of high school education, and you have to take a language test in either English or French. For that language test, you have to receive scores that are consistent with or above what's called the Canadian Language Benchmark of level 7. Now, for those of you overseas, probably the most common language test used is the IELTS General Training. For that exam, the scores that you need for the minimum are a 6 in each of the 4 categories. So that's 6 in listening, 6 in speaking, 6 in reading, 6 in writing, and that's the minimum to be eligible for the Federal Skilled Worker Program. For FSW, there's also, and this gets a little complicated, there is a points grid that you have to meet a minimum number of points on. So this is called the FSW points grid. It's out of 100 points, and in order to be eligible, you have to have at least 67 out of 100 points. And that takes into account things like age, language proficiency, education, adaptability factors. There's a bunch of different criteria, but you have to score 67 out of 100 in order
and just to keep people on their toes, it's completely different from the point system for Express Entry. Okay, so the points that you'll get on the Federal Skilled Worker grid for age, for example, is different than what you get on the Express Entry point system. So that's one thing that I find sometimes is it's difficult to identify this through the website, through Immigration Canada website. So just bear in mind that, as Dane said, it's not just a matter of meeting the basic requirements. You have to show that you meet at least that points pass mark of 67 in order just to qualify. Okay, so sometimes people will say, I meet the requirements, but Express Entry tells me that I don't qualify, and the reason for that is simply they don't meet the pass mark. Okay, so the grid is on the website, but it is really important that you are aware of that there's this first hurdle first, just to be able to get into the Express Entry pool.
Mm-hmm. And I do see a question coming in from Niborte Bortier, who's asking, what about the academic IELTS exam? We were just talking about the language test that you have to take in order to be eligible. The academic IELTS is not accepted for Express Entry. You cannot use academic IELTS results. The only 2 English tests that are accepted are the IELTS General Training and another exam called the CELPIP General. Great. So that about covers it for the Federal Skilled Worker Program. There are 2 other Express Entry aligned programs. Louise, do you want to take the next one?
So I'll talk about the Canadian Experience Class, otherwise known as the CEC. This is a lovely program for those of you that are eligible, let's say, to come over on an IAC and are able to come over to Canada on a working holiday visa, where you can then get some Canadian work experience. So the basic requirement, is 1 year of 1 year of full-time skilled work experience in Canada. It does not need to be continuous. So that's a big difference between the CEC and the FSW, is that the work experience in Canada under the Canadian Experience Class does not need to be continuous. So if somebody comes and they do, let's say 6 months in a skilled job, and then go and travel for 2 months and then come back and do another 6 months, then that 12 months counts. And just so you know, from Immigration Canada's perspective, their definition of full-time is 30 hours a week. So 30 hours a week is equivalent to full-time skilled work. That actually is the main requirement for Canadian Experience Class. There are language requirements too. The language requirements do vary dependent on your skill level. So whether it's OA or B, the language requirement differs slightly. I can tell you exactly what those are if you want. And also, just to remind you, the 12 months of skilled work experience in Canada has to be in the last 3 years. In order for you to qualify. You don't necessarily need to show education, but obviously if you want to get points under Express Entry, then you're going to need to. Okay,
Yeah.
so then you'll have to get your credential assessment done.
And we're going to talk about the comprehensive ranking score. Often, to be competitive, Canadian Experience Class candidates realize, oh, I do need some level of
Yeah.
education.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Basically, you won't be selected otherwise. One point to note with Canadian Experience Class is that they do not include self-employment. Okay, so that's a really big difference again between CC and FSW. So if somebody does come over on an open work permit, for example, absolutely you can start you can start a business. However, you are not going to be able to claim those points for Canadian work experience. So that's an important point to note.
Great, thank you, Louise. The other Express Entry aligned program is called the Federal Skilled Trades Program. This is the least popular of the three of them, so we won't spend a ton of time on it. It can be quite difficult to qualify for, to be honest. The Federal Skilled Trades Program is called this because it specifically targets people with experience in trades occupations. And in addition to, so you need work experience in a skilled trade. In addition to that, you also need a connection to Canada, either in the form of a Canadian job offer from a Canadian employer to practice in your skilled trade, or you can have a certificate of qualification from a Canadian province that enables you to practice that trade in Canada. And often to get that certificate of qualification, you need Canadian work experience, you need to be here, you need to have done an apprenticeship. So because of that connection to Canada, it can be quite difficult for people to meet the eligibility. But if you are a tradesperson, if that sounds like it fits your profile, check out our website. You'll be able to we have an entire resource on federal skilled trades, so you can get more information about that there.
Yeah, no, it was one of those programs that was brought out to a lot of fanfare, but actually has not been one of the most successful programs because there are quite a few limitations with regards to eligibility.
And so, as we've mentioned, just meeting the minimum eligibility criteria for these three programs, it does not mean that you will succeed. It does not mean that you will receive an invitation to apply. Meeting the eligibility requirements is just the first step. You then have to be competitive enough to receive an invitation. The other Express Entry aligned program, to a certain extent, is the Provincial Nominee Programs, or PNPs. These are essentially mini immigration programs operated by Canada's provinces and territories that allow the provinces and territories to select and nominate immigrants who will meet a specific need for that province. So you may have heard of these before. There's a lot. There's about 80 different active streams at any given time. So it's a lot of different criteria out there. But there are two types of PNPs. One is aligned with Express Entry. And if you can get a nomination in one of these Express Entry aligned PNPs, you will then receive a 600-point boost to your CRS score. It will make you super competitive.
It's basically your golden ticket, isn't it? Yeah. PNP nomination, Express Entry is like your golden ticket because you can pretty much, we never use the word guarantee in immigration, but you can be strongly assured that you will get an invitation to apply if you've got your PNP nomination through Express Entry.
Yeah, and then there are also PNPs that are not aligned with Express Entry. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about those today, but through those you can go through a completely separate immigration application process. It takes a lot longer. It's not Express Entry. It usually takes like 2 years to process that. But there are some of those out there. We've got a tool on our website, our PNP Live Tracker and PNP tool. You can check that to get tons of updates about Canada's PNPs as well. You can plug in sort of your criteria and we'll suggest to you which PNPs might be options for you, so you can look into that.
And it is an excellent tool because honestly, otherwise you're just going around to every single province trying to get all the information. To have them all together in one place is a huge benefit.
Yeah, like putting together that resource took like months of research. So
one little thing I just we didn't note is that when you mentioned the other PNPs is that Express Entry, just so you know, it's an online application, okay? So everything is electronically submitted. And when Dane was talking about like the other PNP type applications, those are old school. Those are paper applications for the most part, which is also why they take longer. But one of the reasons anyway. But yeah, so that is a difference. They're still paper applications, whereas the regular Express Entry are online applications.
Yeah, and that actually leads really well into the next part of the presentation. You're so good
I did it on purpose.
Did you?
No.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the application process right now. So Express Entry is essentially a two-stage application process. The first stage is creating your Express Entry profile. As Louise said, this is all done online. In fact, both steps are done entirely online. So you create your profile, you'll need your language test results, you'll need proof of your education, you'll need some identification documents, and then you can create your profile in this online system. It automatically checks to see if you're eligible. If you are, it shuttles you into the Express Entry pool. If you're not, it will simply tell you you're not eligible. If you'd like, you can create a new profile once your criteria changed. And it enters you into the Express Entry pool, where there are approximately 130,000 candidates this week. So it's a big and competitive pool.
It is. The days of first come, first serve are long gone, so it's now it's very much immigration selects the creme de la creme, as it were, of applicants.
And the next part of the application process is receiving your invitation to apply.
The invitation to apply.
Can you talk about how that works?
Sure. So, there's draws that happen generally around every 2 weeks or so, okay, normally on a Wednesday. And what happens is that Immigration Canada will select the top, on average it's about 3,600, applicants, and out of the whole pool of candidates. The last draw was the points threshold was 471, okay, and so what that meant was that everybody with 471 or above, okay, with a couple of exceptions, will be issued an invitation to apply. And what that means is that suddenly means that, okay, now you can actually submit your permanent residency application. And so what that is you have 60 days, okay? And in those 60 days, you have to enter all of your information, which will then bring you to the document checklist. And you will then have a box for each document that you will need to upload, okay? And then you'll upload that, pay the fees, do your medical, then the application goes in, and then the 6 months processing time starts. Mm-hmm. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and if you think you're going to be competitive enough to receive your invitation to apply, prepare in advance. 60 days might sound like a long time, but
like this.
This application is complex.
Yeah.
It's detailed. You have to enter all of your personal information, your address history, your travel history. You have to gather a bunch of different documents, from police certificates to medical exams to job reference letters. And
don't be expecting an extension, because Immigration Canada will not give you an extension. That's the one thing, because it's an automated system. The 60 days is up. If your documents are not submitted, then...
If your documents aren't submitted, too bad. If you submit it with a document missing and you're like, oh, well, I got 99% of it, it'll be fine.
Ask me for it. No.
They won't come back and ask you for it. They will just refuse the application. I mean, in rare cases, you might have a really friendly officer, but in most cases. And I did see somebody ask a question that I can address right now. Mm-hmm. Can we have more than one NOC code in the experience that we enter in the Express Entry profile? Yes, you can. Just when you create your Express Entry profile, you have to make sure that at least one listing in your work experience meets that minimum eligibility criteria, meets that 1 year of continuous full-time skilled work experience. That's for FSW or for the other programs, as we mentioned. And then outside of that, once you meet that minimum criteria, you can add more work experience in different NOC codes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. So... it's now time to talk about how IRCC decides which profiles are the most competitive in Express Entry, and this is using the comprehensive ranking system. So the comprehensive ranking system is a points-based system. You may be familiar with the CRS score. This is a score out of 1,200 points, out of 1,200 points. When you create your Express Entry profile, this automated system, it goes through and it looks at your work experience, it looks at your education, it looks at your language proficiency, and each of those things receives a score. And so when you enter the Express Entry pool, you'll be given your score out of 1,200 points. If you are competitive enough, as Louise mentioned, approximately every 2 weeks, the Canadian government conducts an Express Entry draw, where they will establish a CRS score cutoff. So The last week, it was 471 points. So everyone with a CRS score above that, 472 points and higher, received an invitation to apply, as well as some of the people at 471 also received an invitation.
Yeah.
They usually create a cutoff for when
Right.
your profile was created for that tiebreaker. Just to give you a bit of an idea of how the CRS score has looked over the last couple of years, Express Entry was created in 2015. The lowest CRS score cutoff we've ever seen for all programs, for an all program draw, was 413 points, and that was in
May 2017. Yeah.
Yeah.
And interesting to note, they actually changed the system. It'll highly likely never get to that score again, because they changed it in June 2017, in which they brought in more points, more ways to get points. So I doubt it'll ever get that low again.
Yeah, it's
And actually, since February, it's not been under 450 this
yeah,
year.
well, so we had, in January, it went down to 438,
Right.
which was its lowest point in the last year. And the highest cutoff for 2019 was just a couple of weeks ago, and that was 475
That's
points.
crazy.
I know, I'm not even going to read the questions, because I know probably people are writing in saying, will the score go down? What will the score be? We cannot tell you in good confidence. Anything that we say is an estimate. It's a guess. Many things affect the CRS score: the number of people who are entering the pool, the number of people who are improving their profiles, the number of people who are invited in a draw. They might invite 3,600 people one week, 2,500 the next week.
And what's important to note too is that, for the most part, these draws, they focus on the federal skilled worker and the Canadian experience class. Okay, there are a couple of program specific draws, and these tend to be under the federal skilled trades, and that's because, as a general rule, people in the federal skilled trades class tend to score lower points, and so they've done 2 draws this year for federal skilled trades, which is great, except what that means then is that sometimes then there's no draw for the other 2 programs for a month. And so then the applications build up, or the profiles build up, and so which pushes then the point score higher. And also, as we were talking about PNPs, the more PNPs there are, that also brings up the median point score. So, it's, we've seen such, from 438 to 475, it's incredibly hard to predict.
And just so Louise in a moment is going to give you some tips for preparing your application for permanent residency, but before that I wanted to give you just a couple tips on what to do if your CRS score isn't high enough, because we always get this question: how do I improve my CRS score? How do I make it better? There are a few options for some short-term improvements, things that are relatively easy to do. One option is retaking your language tests. So that's either English or French. There is a threshold in the language test scores that will get you the highest possible points, because under Express Entry, under the CRS, there's a set of points for skills transferability factors. Right. And this is essentially combination points. So you'll get points for having a high level of language proficiency and a high level of education, or a high level of foreign work experience and a high level of language proficiency. It's these sort of combo points. And to qualify for those combo points for the highest level of language, you have to receive scores equal to the Canadian language benchmark of level 9, or CLB 9. Again, I'm going to talk in terms of the IELTS, because that's the most commonly used language test. For IELTS, again, it's general training, and to meet that CLB 9, you have to receive an 8 in listening, a 7 in speaking, a 7 in reading, and a 7 in writing. Those are the scores that you really want to aim for if you want to maximize your CRS score. So if you haven't quite achieved those scores, and let's say you have a 6.5 in writing, but the other scores are all 8s, it's worth it. It's worth it to retake
Totally. And I'll just jump in for a second. It's important for everybody to know, because a lot of times people email me and they're like, my band score. And I'm like, you know what, immigration, it's not about the band score, okay? It is the score per ability. So as Dane mentioned, reading, writing, speaking, listening. So it is each ability. I did just a little breakdown to give you an idea of how important the language test is, okay? So I took a scenario of, let's say somebody was 29 years old, bachelor's degree, 1 year of Canadian skilled work experience, 1 year of foreign skilled work experience. If they had a CLB of 8 across the board, they'd be sitting at 414 points. If they had a CLB of 9 across the board, they'd be sitting at 470 points. points. Okay, so that's where that huge difference comes. The difference with regards to the skill transferability factors, it makes such a difference. Having that benchmark of 9 really makes the world of difference to the potential for you to be able to get an invitation.
Mm-hmm. And for other options, and that was great. I love that example. We planned this. Other options for improving your CRS score: increase the amount of work experience you have. That just takes some patience. Increasing your level of education. Sometimes adding a 1-year postgraduate diploma can improve your CRS score. So again, takes patience. It's going to take a little bit of time, but that can also boost you up under those skills transferability factor points. And then the other option that we honestly recommend is if your CRS score isn't competitive enough, it might be worth considering other immigration pathways as well. There are other ways to come to Canada. You can come first as a temporary worker, maybe under International Experience Canada, Working Holiday Program, as Louise mentioned before. If you're young, if you're looking to improve your education, you can come first as an international student. Do your college or university in Canada, and that allows you to stay afterwards, work, and makes a relatively easy transition to permanent resident status.
Yeah, and then you have a Canadian degree as well, and you get extra points. So not only do you get the points for your qualification, but then you get extra points in the CRS system. It's expensive though. That's the only downside is that you have to pay international fees. But like Dane mentioned, it allows you to come over, study, get a Canadian qualification, and a postgrad work permit, so then you can get the work experience as well.
And it depends on where you are. If you're in the US and you choose to come to Canada as an international student, you're probably going to save money.
Absolutely. I went to McGill. McGill was half American because it was cheaper actually for American students
to come too.
Yeah, look, that's policy.
If to check out a lot of Canada's different immigration options. Again, I'm going to recommend going to our website, movingtocanada.com. We have a whole section there on how to immigrate to Canada. It will take you through all the different types of visas and permits and help you navigate which path is the best for you. Great. So just before we get to some questions, Louise has prepared for you some practical tips for creating and submitting your, this is the permanent residency application.
Yeah, this is for the permanent residency application. So, everybody, you've created your profile, and then when you get to receiving the invitation to apply, there's a few things that you need to know, when submitting the permanent residency application. The first thing is that the way the system works is that you first of all have to enter all of your detailed information in order to bring you to a document checklist. So you want to make sure that you do that first of all. Don't leave it just say, I think I need to get this document or whatever. Enter all of your information, and most importantly, keep track of everything that you've entered. So what I generally recommend is, prepare, a CV basically, but a very detailed CV, so that you can refer back to it, because if you want to see, what work experience did I put, you need to list it, you need to make sure it's consistent throughout. And there are times immigration do come back and ask you to fill out a form with regards to work experience, so you want to make sure that you have all of that to hand. You have to enter your travel history. So make sure you have all of this written out beforehand so that you can just refer back to a document when filling in the information. Do not leave it till the last minute. It takes a long time to fill out all of this information, and not only that, like I said, you have to do that in order just to get to the document checklist. When you get to the document checklist, you have to make sure that you are able not just to get the documents, but you have to be able to scan them. So although it sounds dumb, make sure you have a scanner. Don't be taking photos on your phone. Make sure you have a decent scanner. Immigration will only accept documents up to 4 megabytes. So make sure you have the ability to minimize documents. You can do, you can get Adobe Pro, you can get a free trial for 30 days, and that will allow you then to be able to minimize the documents so that they are the right size to be able to upload. Make sure the scanned documents are clear. It sounds silly, but sometimes some of the scans I get are really not clear. So make sure they're clear. Make sure any documents that are not in English or French are accompanied by a certified translation. Include a submission letter. So this I can't recommend strongly enough. It's important that you include a submission letter which basically can address any odd situations, for example, or if you lived in Europe and traveled all over Europe and you can't quite remember every single trip that you did, address it and just say, I've done it to the best of my ability, but obviously passports weren't stamped. So, use that letter to also explain why you are eligible, and then also explain other situations. If you have a non-accompanying dependent child, for example, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. You have to provide the documentation. With regards to police checks, you must make sure you have the right ones, okay? These are all on the IRCC website. And but it's really important, because if you upload the wrong one, your application will highly likely just be cancelled, okay? For Australia, make sure it's the right one. Make sure you have your traffic history report. If you've lived, there's a couple of states there. If you've lived in Victoria or Queensland, you have to get the traffic history report. If they're not there, they will cancel.
Can I ask you, we've got a couple questions coming in
Sure.
about these documents. For the documents, police records, medical exams, is there a timeline that they have to be issued? Do they expire at a certain
Well,
point?
the police check, so it really depends, okay? So it depends as to, so Immigration Canada always look at the last 10 years, okay? So basically any country that you've lived in for more than 6 months in the last 10 years or since turning 18, you do need to include police checks,
Right.
okay? Now, if so, say for example, you're living in Ireland right now, okay? You need to issue, it's called a Garda check, or you need to submit a Garda check that has been issued within the last 6 months.
Right.
However, if you were living in Ireland and you just left and you've arrived in Canada on your IEC, you have to have a police check that's been issued post-departure, okay? So it really does depend, okay?
Right.
There are often times when people say, well, I did, it wasn't quite 6 months, or I did 3 months and 3 months. Just bear in mind that immigration always have the right to request a police check, okay?
Yeah.
Depending on the situation, I will sometimes tell people, listen, just go ahead and get it, just for sake of completion. Then you've got it, you've uploaded it, you've gone that extra step. Okay?
Yeah, they won't refuse you for not having submitted something for, if you lived in a place for 4 months,
Right.
say.
Right,
But they
exactly.
do
They may,
commonly
yeah.
come back and ask you to submit that later on.
And there are some countries where it's difficult to get to, where they take a long time. So the tip for this is make sure you keep track, okay? So make sure you include proof of submission. So if you've submitted, let's say you've applied for a police check, it hasn't come back, but you've submitted a copy of the application form, a copy of the fee paid, a copy of the FedEx envelope, proof of delivery, so you can show that you've done everything you can and you're still waiting on it. Okay, so as long as you can show that. Okay.
And a couple of other, so responding to Lara Ambrose, who was asking about the document timelines, there are some other expiration dates you should be aware of.
Absolutely.
For the medical exam, they're going to, if you are successful and they issue you your visa to travel to Canada, usually that visa expires 1 year after the date that you completed your medical exam.
Exactly.
So you're only going to want to take the medical exam usually after you've received your invitation
Wait
to
till you
apply.
get the invitation to apply for the medical.
And then the other one that I wanted to mention was for language tests.
Language test, 2 years.
Yeah, it has to be 2 years from the date that you submit your final application for permanent residence. So yeah, that's a good thing to be aware of.
One thing I want to mention too is with regards to reference letters. Okay, so people say, what about what proof of employment? It's incredibly important that your reference letter is accurate and clear, and there's no ambiguity in it, okay? Especially depending on some of the occupations, because some occupations, there's a few gray areas, and especially if there's any doubt as to whether it's a skilled occupation or not, you need to make sure that reference letter is clear, it's dated, it's signed, it's on letterhead, and it's recent, okay? And it needs to list what you did, where you did it, how long you did it for, basically. And then you support that letter with a contract, pay slips, okay? If you've had any promotions throughout the time, include that information. And if you've worked in Canada, your T4 and your notice of assessment, okay? So one thing to mention for those that are working in Canada, make sure that you have an employer-employee relationship. It's all above board. You pay your taxes, make sure there are deductions taken off your pay slips, and make sure you include all of that proof, okay? The proof of work experience is probably the most critical part, I think, of the application. And immigration do check the NOT codes, and they do make sure that all the information submitted aligns with the NOT code that you've claimed.
Yeah, I think with proof of work experience, the important thing to realize is that you have a lot of control over what information is going to be included in that letter. With a lot of the other documents, with medical exams, with police certificates, you get the right document and you have the right document. With the work experience letter, you can submit a letter and it can be missing information because you didn't do your due diligence in making sure that was.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to remember that the onus is always on you, the applicant, okay, to provide the documentation that immigration have requested. An immigration officer can only render a decision based on documentation that is submitted to them. Okay, so just make sure that you always have everything that's requested. There's a reason that immigration asks for everything. There's a reason they ask for police checks. They ask for the medical, the languages, etc. There's a reason they ask for who are your family members, that kind of thing. So there's a reason they ask for all of this. Don't and this goes without saying. Obviously, be truthful in your information. Be accurate. Okay, you don't want to be done for misrepresentation.
Yeah, misrepresentation is, a legal offense in Canada. If you misrepresent yourself on an immigration application, not only is your application rejected, but you can also be banned from entering Canada, from submitting any new applications for 5 years. So it's quite serious. Don't lie on your applications. We shouldn't have to say that. Yeah, exactly.
We shouldn't have to say that because it will come back and bite you. It will come back and bite you. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
One
thing we didn't mention, was how much the fees.
Right.
Okay, so you also, when you submit the application, you need to pay the application fee. So that application fee per adult is $550. Okay, if you have any children, it's $150 per child. There's also what's called the right of permanent residency fee, which is $490 for you and your spouse. Okay, there's no the RPRF does not apply to the children. You will have the option as to whether or not you want to pay the RPRF upfront at the beginning or not. It's up to you. For a more streamlined application, it's better if you just pay it up front. Okay. There's also the biometric fee. Okay, so that's $85 per person or $170 per family. And so what that means is that immigration will issue a biometric letter. You'll have to go and get your fingerprints and photos taken at the local VAC. And as of today, they've just introduced biometrics for in Canada applicants.
Oh.
Yeah, December 3rd. So at the Service Canada office, it literally came out about 5:30 last night.
Interesting.
Yeah, so up until now in Canada, I didn't have to do biometrics, but as of today, you do.
Just trying to show me up here. I see.
On the ball.
And on the subject of money as well, another thing, and we had a couple questions come in about this, is the proof of funds requirement.
Right, yes, of course.
So proof of funds or proof of means of financial support.
Yeah.
So if you're applying to express entry under FSW, or FST, Canadian Experience Class is actually exempt from this,
exactly.
As are people who have job offers. Otherwise, you have to show that you have enough funds to support yourself and your family members when you land in Canada. For a single applicant, I believe it's about
12,669. Yeah, so I always say 13,000. Just to give it a bit of just up it a little bit. But round it up.
It's smart too, especially if you're showing proof in a different currency.
Exactly,
to
currency
have it
fluctuations.
A little bit higher, just in case it fluctuates. So it starts at about 13,000, and then you add about $3,000-ish dollars for each additional family member included on your application. In order to prove your funds, and I'm going to do my best to explain this, but we've got our expert here, so please correct me if I'm wrong. You do have to submit proof that you have access to the funds that should be in liquid format. That means that you can access it readily, easily. It needs to be in your name, or if you're applying with a partner, it can also be in your partner's name, in both of your names. It can be a combination of the two. And you generally have to submit proof. So the best thing to do is submit a bank account records that you have this money in your bank account, and you're going to want to submit 6 months.
Yeah, you submit 6 months, sure. Yeah,
6 months.
3 to 6 months. Immigration want to make sure that your name is on it. Okay, the best thing is to have a letter from the bank supported by bank statements. Okay, so it shows they can show the traceability, I guess. But yeah, 6 months is good. And I often get asked, well, what if my parents have just given me like $5,000? And that's fine, okay? That's absolutely fine because, and again, this is one of the things that needs to be addressed up front, because if immigration suddenly see, $5,000 deposited in your bank account, 2 months ago or a month ago, and suddenly that miraculously brings you up to the threshold, they might say, well, hang on, is this money actually yours? And so if your parents gave it to you, as long as it's gifted, okay, it must be given, so it can't be loaned to you. And so as long as there's confirmation that that money has been gifted to you, then that's fine.
And what I've been told you can submit with that is a document called a deed of gift,
Sure.
which is essentially just a one-page letter stating, you know,
Or
this is...
or a notarized letter, absolutely, but
You
just
know.
a confirmation that that money does not need to be repaid.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So I think we're ready to move over to our question period.
Perfect. Yeah.
Just before we get into that, as you have been witnessing through this, Louise is an expert when it comes to Express Entry. She really knows her stuff. So if you do have questions that we're not able to address, especially really specific questions about your personal profile, your personal journey through Express Entry, which we might not be able to get to today, you can always book a consultation with Louise. She's great. We're going to post the link in the description of this video. So you can go there, book a consult. You don't have to be in Montreal to do it. She can do it over Skype or over the phone with you. And she will go through your exactly your personal details, and we'll figure out which immigration pathway for Canada is the best for you. If it's Express Entry, she'll give you a little bit of advice on next steps.
Exactly, and it's always good too if anybody has any concerns. You know, sometimes people like, you know, I'm ready to go, but oh gosh, I have a drunk driving offense from 4 years ago. Is that going to be an issue? These are things that, you know what, address it now, because yes, that is going to be an issue. You know, so these are things that you're better to find out all the information beforehand, because you don't want to spend a lot of time and money doing everything, doing your language test, ESA, etc., if you're not going to be eligible. So it's good to get as much information up front as possible.
And it's also a one-time consultation fee. You know, it's if it turns out that you do want more service, you want to go through the whole process, there's going to be additional fees, but you pay for one consultation and then really figure out if Express Entry is a good option for you.
And on that note, I'll just quickly mention that there's, obviously I am a regulated immigration consultant, but there's no obligation, okay? It's a personal decision as to whether or not somebody hires a representative or not. It's entirely up to you. I was telling Dan earlier, I always give the example of, an accountant. I don't need an accountant to file my taxes, but I always hire one, because I know that they'll do a much better job than I do, and they know the taxation system inside and out, which I do not. So that's what I always use as, a parallel example.
Great, yeah. So like I said, we'll post a link in the description of the video so you can check that out if you are interested. So let's jump into some questions. We've had a lot of questions coming in here. Let me see where to start. Okay, how long do I have to have proof of funds money in my account to be accepted? 3 to 6 months is what we're recommending here. Oh, here's a question that I saw in a couple different versions. I've already received a qualifying CELPIP score. CELPIP is one of the English language tests, like the IELTS. Would it be worth the time and money to have my wife take the test as well? So this is a really important thing to understand if you're applying with a partner. So under Express Entry, under the comprehensive ranking system, if you apply as a single applicant, there are 500 points. Correct me if I'm wrong here, 500 points that are allotted to you as a single applicant based on your human capital factors. If you apply with a spouse, you don't receive additional points. Instead, they break that 500 up. Yeah. So you will receive instead 460 points, so you receive a little bit less, and your spouse will be awarded up to 40 points based on their criteria, so their language test scores, their language, their education, and if they have a Canadian
work experience only.
Canadian work experience.
Yeah. So, and it does, in response to the question, it really depends. Okay, it depends on where the main applicant is sitting with regards to their points. If they're already way and above, there's no requirement for the spouse to do the language test. But obviously, if they're short a few points, then absolutely it can be worth it.
If you're at 455, for example, you can get up to 20 points for your spouse's language.
Exactly.
So, hey, that's probably going to be the thing that makes or break whether or not you get an invitation to apply.
And the one thing just on language tests, prepare for it, okay? You have to prepare for it. It doesn't matter if English is your native language. Prepare for the test so you know exactly what it is that you're walking into. So you know how the test is broken up, okay? So do the practice test, because you'd be amazed actually at the number of times I get tests back for native English speakers who actually don't meet the required benchmark. So it is really important to take it seriously and make sure you get the highest score possible.
We've got a question coming in here from Abina. What do you do if your profile is expired? So Express Entry profiles, once you submit it to the pool, it's valid for a maximum of 12 months. Or, if something expires within that 12-month period, your language test scores expire, it's also going to be pulled out at that point. Abina couldn't find a way to renew it. You don't technically renew it, you create and submit a new Express Entry profile. You do still have to meet the eligibility requirements, but there's no limit on the number of times that you can create and submit an Express Entry profile. As long as you're eligible, every time it expires, you can resubmit.
Exactly.
Great. And someone here asks, if we send our CV to Moving to Canada or to Louise, can we get a reply of the NOC code that's matching our CV? For this person, Waleed, it's difficult for them to personally choose a specific NOC code, even after checking all the NOC codes on the government websites. I'm going to speak for Moving to Canada, and then I'll let Louise speak for herself. Moving to Canada we are not an immigration service provider. We do not prepare or submit applications. We are here to bring you as much accurate and up-to-date information as possible, but we can't actually work on your application on your behalf. However, Louise...
Yeah, I can, I certainly can, but at the end of the day, I don't do your job, right? So I don't do the job of the applicant, so I can only tell somebody based on information that they provide to me. And then we can look to see what is the best NOC code to fit. But I have had situations where what's written on a CV is not necessarily always accurate as to what somebody did. So I do often have to ask quite a few questions, and then we look to see which one would best match your NOC.
Mm-hmm. And we had, I just lost the question, so I'm not going to be able to say your name, but someone asking what is the application process for Canadian Experience class if you are self-employed? We mentioned this during when we went over CEC earlier, but unfortunately self-employed
work in Canada does not count.
Yeah, it does not count for Canadian Experience class. That said, does it count for FSW?
Well, it counts as skilled work. Okay, mm-hmm. Wait, not necessarily. Not necessarily, right. No, actually. No.
Okay, Okay, under the new government, we had an election in Canada on October 21st. Those of you who are familiar with our very bubbly Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. I tried to think of a way to say attractive that wasn't that was appropriate for camera, but I ended up saying it anyway. He was re-elected. The Liberal government was re-elected. They now have a minority government. Before they had a majority, so it was very easy for them to push policy through. Now they have a minority. So we have Batyaroot asking, under the new government, are the CRS rules and procedures going to change? Can I hand that to you, Louise?
Who knows? Honestly, we don't know. Our immigration minister did change, which made me really sad because I really liked Minister Hussein. But at least we have the same government. I don't see any big changes coming, but who knows? Sometimes with immigration, we don't know, and then all of a sudden, boom, here's a new change and it's effective tomorrow. It's hard to say, but right now, I would say with Express Entry, it's coming up to almost, it's been a few years now. The glitches have been worked out. When I first came in, the glitches were crazy, literally almost drove me to an early grave. But now, the glitches have been worked out. It works well, okay? It does work well. I think they've put so much time and effort into it, I don't see the system changing.
Yeah,
personally.
And it seems to be... Yeah,
it does work. It does work. It allows immigration to keep control of everything, keep control of the numbers, because it's not first come, first served. So it gives them a lot of leeway to do what they want to do. So I don't personally see it changing.
Mm-hmm. We have Sevki here asking, if my application is rejected due to the wrong NOC type, is there a ban to reapply? Based on my knowledge, if your application is rejected or refused for any reason, you are able to, as soon as you want, recreate a new Express Entry profile. You still have to receive a new invitation to apply, but then you can apply again for PR as soon as you are invited. My one note on that is they are going to ask you in your application, have you applied before?
Exactly.
Make sure that you're honest there, and make sure that you state that you have applied before. It's okay if you were rejected, but make sure that you also do address the reasons that you were refused or rejected when you submit your new application.
100%, yeah. Because if the knock was inaccurate, was it because you put the wrong knock, or was it because you claimed a knock that was not accurate to your job? So you have to really, like Dane said, really address it as to why, because immigration, will make sure that you do have the correct experience.
And on the note of work experience as well, Alan is asking, what happens if I change positions within a year of work experience, given that both of them are skilled?
So the answer to that, Alan, is it really depends where you are. Okay, if it's under Canadian experience class, it doesn't matter. Okay, if it's federal skilled worker, you have to have at least 12 months of continuous skilled employment in the same knock code. Okay, so if you have the 1 year before and then you change, it's fine. Okay, but you have to make sure you have at least 12 months continuous full-time skilled employment in the same knock. Okay, if you then get promoted, and that's fine, but then you do have to break down that employment, just so you know. Okay, yeah, if you get promoted and then your knock code is then a director or a manager, you do have to list that in your employment history as a new level of employment, new knock code, etc.
Okay, great. We've got just a couple questions left. Esterlyn is asking, I filled out the form to see if I'm eligible for express entry. Will I have any problems now if I want to go studying first? Absolutely not. Creating an express entry profile does not count as an immigration application. So you can feel free to submit other immigration applications for other programs. I think the only note there is, like, if you are considering applying for express entry and maybe another immigration program another permanent residency program at the same time, once you receive that invitation to apply, you submit that application for permanent residence. At that point, you have to be a little bit careful about what else you're submitting. So if you apply for that and you apply for, let's say, a Quebec immigration PR program, and you have two competing applications that say you have an intention to be in Quebec and an intention to be in another province.
That's a good point, and I was just thinking, when we're talking about express entry, we didn't mention that you actually cannot have the intention to reside in Quebec.
Yeah.
Okay, when you file an express entry application, it's for the whole of Canada except for Quebec, and that's because Quebec has its own immigration system, which is a whole other seminar on its own.
Yeah, it's a whole other set of seminars.
Yeah.
Quebec now Quebec immigration is also in flux right now, so it's
good choice of words. Yes.
I like to maintain neutral language. Can you explain a soft landing for a permanent residency?
Can you explain soft landing? I don't know what you mean by soft landing.
I'm also not entirely sure, but I can give a bit of.
Do they mean somebody who arrives and then doesn't stay? I'm guessing.
I'm guessing that.
When somebody gets their permanent residency, okay, so let's say your residency document is issued, let's say January 1st, okay, 2020, and it's valid till, let's say, June 1st, 2020. What that means is that that person must physically arrive in Canada prior to June 1st in order to validate their permanent residency. Okay, so let's say then they land on May 1st. So then from May 1st 2020 to May 1st 2025, they have to be in Canada for 2 years. Okay, out of those 5 years. Is there a requirement for you to necessarily stay? No, there is not. Okay, as long as you still have the intention to reside in Canada, but you must validate prior to that expiry date. If you then need to return home, because you have to, matters to settle, etc., that's fine.
I believe I've been told before, and maybe this is inaccurate, but I've been told that you do have to provide an address within Canada where they're going to send your PR card.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if you are planning on, coming, let's say you're working in the United States and you want to return back and finish your work contract, so you come activate your PR status, just be aware, find a friend or a family member in Canada who you'll be able to provide that address.
A PR card is only ever sent within Canada. It is not sent outside of the country.
Great. So, I think we're going to wrap up at this point because we've gone a little bit over. It's past 10:30 here on the East Coast.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh, that means you had fun? Okay, that's nice. So just to recap for you, Thank you so much for tuning in. We know Express Entry is complicated. We've just talked about it for an hour and haven't even covered everything that there is. So for more information, to learn more, we have a ton of resources on Moving to Canada. On our website, movingtocanada.com, that's the number 2, movingtocanada.com. We have just tons of pages about immigration, but if you're interested in Express Entry, I'm going to recommend looking up our Express Entry Roadmap. This is a free email education service. Just give us your email address. We'll send you 7 lessons. It's totally free. Each lesson will cover a different topic of Express Entry, much like what we've done today. So you'll get sort of a recap on all the important things, and then at the end of that, you'll have the information to sort of guide you along the Express Entry process. You can also check out our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of videos up there telling people about Express Entry related subjects, as well as other things about Canadian immigration. And you're here on a live video on Facebook. We always go live when there is an Express Entry draw. So make sure you follow us on Facebook and you'll get a notification if you want to be one of the first people to find out about the latest Express Entry draw information. Louise, if somebody is interested in booking an immigration consultation.
Yeah, if somebody wants to book a consultation, they can go to your website.
Mhm.
Okay, go to your website, and then there is the tab there to book an immigration
Yeah.
consultation.
And we're also going to have the link in the description of this
Perfect.
video.
Yeah, so you can just go there, and then you just you book it, and then we'll get in touch with you to confirm the best date and time to speak, and then we can go over. And before that, we'll have all of your details, so we can do a full assessment, determine what the options are for you, or even sometimes people just want to, they have specific questions they just want to ask, and so I can just go through all of those specific case-specific questions with them.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you guys again so
Thank
much
you.
for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure. We're hoping to come back and do more videos like this in the future, so stay tuned. And thank you, Louise.
Thank
so
you,
much for joining
Dane.
us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, it's done.
We're sitting here like,
I was just like smiling at the
Oh, yeah.
camera, like, this doesn't look normal. Great.
how was that?
That was fantastic.
Yeah? Oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Ah, nice. Nice work.
Nice job.
Should be proud of yourselves, guys.
That was a fucking hour. I'm sorry, I swear.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. I never started.
Great. How many
I
people
feel like
did,
it's like later on and we should have like a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was like 10:30.
Time for a beer? No.
Perfect.
Mimosa.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay.
Next time we have mimosa as well. Maybe not, because then we might save like more.
Great.
Will we be going into the comments and like at least addressing some more of them, or is that?
We
What do you-
can.
No.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
Because there's a lot.
how much time we have.
Is there a lot of
I was going to
comments?
throw
or-
like just sort of catch
so
on the
many.
hot, throw the link into book consultation like now.
Yeah.
Well,
Did
it's
someone
on the
turn off
page.
this
Yeah.
video?
Yeah, I
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, don't worry.
Do you need the link?
No, it's great. I know where it is. Hi,
Oh, look at us.
Oh, hi, madam.
Oh, no.
Go straight to.
All I could see was like, oh god, I should have done my roots, man.
Okay, was I in the frame at the beginning?
I don't know. I'll have to
I didn't. I was checking. I
Yeah.
put my
I
head
was
over
okay.
it 10 times and it looked great every time.
Okay. I was just at the very beginning. I was kind of like.
How many people were watching? Do we know?
At the peak, there was like maybe 86.